I will now discuss the evolution theory, which basically summarizes how all life on Earth began, starting in the ocean with very simple organisms, which then changed into fish, which changed into amphibians, which crawled out onto lands and became reptiles, which evolved into birds, and somehow human beings fit into this food web when something evolved into monkeys, which then evolved into human beings. And if you study this, they state that they base the whole theory on the fact that these creatures have nuclei, or at least one nucleus. Anyway, we don't really see life change form around us. These food chains that they are describing, or levels of sophistication in nature, isn't a process of evolution. We see every plant or animal maintaining their position and integrity in the cycles of nature. We don't see simple organisms evolving into complex ones. Rather, they always would exist on their level of genetic coding. A human being starts off as a tiny group of cells and grows into a human being. A person didn't start off as ocean plankton and then evolve into a human being. He or she was always so. Yet it's hard to grasp the concept of beginnings, especially planetary beginnings. Yet from out of the fine matter state, these whole ecosystems were created at once. Fine matter, which physicists are always searching for and calling the God particle as they study subatomic particles. When they discover fine matter, it will account for the mass which holds the universe together in star systems, galaxies, and planetary orbits. Essentially, fine matter is pure human consciousness. This spiritual consciousness writes all atomic and genetic code which materializes through subatomic particles into reality. Energy to mass. The planet must go through its cycles before being best suited for human life, so Earth goes through very chaotic beginnings before human life appears. When we see telescopic images of stars forming, we first observe a cloud of gas. This cloud consists mostly of hydrogen atoms, which then superheat and combust into stars which fly out into space. What created this gas cloud in space? Did it just appear on its own? No. The hydrogen atoms materialized from fine matter. The same principle is true concerning the creation and development of planets, only it's much more complex. Instead of creating simple hydrogen atoms to burn in a star in space, the creator must write endless genetic code and atomic structure. Then, from out of the fine matter, the cloud of particles begin to form the basis to what will later develop into a planet orbiting a star capable of supporting life. However, the scientists today have nature explained in evolutionary charts and have on display the impressive fossil record, and then some. The point of interest in these museums is the Neanderthal skeletons, first discovered in the Neander Valley in Germany in 1857, which seemed to have instigated the Darwinian model of evolution from ape, only to find out that the Neanderthals didn't only predate humans, but lived at the same time as well. This defeated the idea that humans evolved from the apish-looking Neanderthal. A study into what is known about the Neanderthal will shed some interesting light onto this being. First, it suffered from vitamin D deficiency, showing that it didn't get much light. This prompted scientists to state that in an ice age, you didn't get much sun. But this doesn't make much sense when you think about sunlight available in colder climates. Another strange report based on scientific studies of Neanderthal bones is that the Neanderthal ate as much meat as an average wolf. Scientists explain this as it could not figure out how to scavenge for other types of food after it managed to survive an ice age, and it died off. Another finding was that the Neanderthal may have been cannibalistic, even though they'd give each other ritual burials and make sophisticated tools. So here's a being who doesn't get much sunlight. He eats more meat than an average wolf. Is very intelligent, but may have been cannibalistic. The tallest skeleton, identified as Neanderthal, is around 5'10", had thick bones, and looked extremely strong. The Neanderthal's cranium was larger than modern humans today, meaning that it had a very large brain. The Neanderthal also had very prominent facial features, such as a massive jaw and a pronounced lower face, giving it a chimp-like appearance. Based on powdered bone analysis, the Neanderthal DNA sequence differs substantially from modern humans. And the last notable report of scientific study about the Neanderthal is that based on this mitochondrial DNA study, the human being is genetically more similar to a chimpanzee than a Neanderthal is. I will explain how this all makes sense, yet baffles scientists, especially those looking at this from an evolutionary perspective. If you do a search for the evolutionary model from chimp to modern man, you'll find that there really isn't one. Maybe you'll find one of these more honest ones here that highlight the errors of the theory of evolution. But the most scientific charts, which will be found in museums, for example, is less like a model and more like a hodgepodge collection of freak skulls arranged into a web-like pattern. Imagine fleshing out this sordid cast. Look, the gang's all here. Look at this guy. This isn't a freak show from hell. This is your family tree. And we got the nice little Neanderthal man all the way up front and center here. Now this may look impressive to some of you scientific types, but the truth is that most of these near-human creatures they keep dreaming up don't even exist. Even so, we still have some nice plaster fossils all lined up at the Museum of Natural History along with their class photos here. Most of these guys look like chimps with nice dental work. And some of these archaeologists have been known for presenting skulls, chimp skulls with filed teeth. So I have one request when looking at all these skulls. Show me the original fossil remains. In the past, the scientific community, looking up to prove the Darwin theory of evolution, have built up whole creatures out of just one tooth. They have been caught combining the bones from two or more different types of animals and mixing together human and chimp bones to create their missing links. Still, these recreations appear as fact, and the museum dreams up the fossil evidence, combining 2 or 3 different bones, and then fleshing out the rest of the skull as they see fit. So we must demand to see the original fossil material of some of these questionable artifacts that appear in museums or in the National Geographic magazine as the Java Man or the Hobbit creature. The scientists of evolutionary theory have been caught time and time again fabricating the fossil record to win the big prize. So everyone goes out looking for evidence as directed by Darwin control. They find a pig tooth a mile away from an ape skull, and they put the two together and win a place on the Addams family wall next to Uncle Fester and Cousin It and the prehistoric chimp. But right in the front door, they have the main fossils that greet you as you walk into the exhibit. This time they got it right with the human being front and center. And to his right, you have a chimp skeleton. And to the left, we have a Neanderthal. It's almost as if the museum is quite sure about these 3 organisms. All right, we know that humans exist. We know that chimps exist. And due to complete fossils found of Neanderthal skeletons and skulls, we know they existed, but we are not entirely sure how or if these skeletons are related. Meanwhile, other skulls, which should be identified as Neanderthal, have shown up from later times. Only now they are larger, especially their cranial capacities. So due to these abnormalities, scientists have ignored their Neanderthal-like facial bones, zoned in on their giant skulls, just to state they are the result of normal human body modification. That's the official story. And there's a whole dialogue of junk coming out of that corner. So it may be a little uncomforting to consider the possibilities that now, thousands of years after the primitive Neanderthal lived, there is now discoveries of skulls, even larger than the Neanderthal, but bearing the same facial features. Only now these advancing Neanderthals are hobnobbing with the royal and priest class of ancient human civilizations. There seems to have been a little mixing of Neanderthal and human genes along the way to create some of these large-headed guys with human hair. Now let's stop right there for a moment and discuss another issue regarding the similar DNA scales of man and chimp. To quote a research geneticist at the University of Florida, quote, "To save money and time, the chimp genome was assembled using the human genome as a template, due to the presupposition that humans evolved from the same line as chimps." So right off the bat, they're a copy of each other. So they line up the two charts, and what doesn't line up between a chimp and a human is considered junk DNA by some scientists. So by these standards, they're going to tell you that your DNA is very similar to a chimpanzee. Now, even if the science is all flawed, it really shouldn't surprise anyone. If we found that we were similar to any other creature on the planet besides an ape or a chimp, I think we'll be in trouble. We'll know that something really doesn't line up correctly. Because out of all the different animals on the planet, which one would you guess resemble people the most? A dog, a rooster, or an ape? So it's most interesting that a Neanderthal, which looks like a chimp, which looks more chimp-like than a person does, is actually less similar to a chimp than a person is. So that sounds a little funny. That sounds like something has been changed with the Neanderthal genetics to make him less similar to this, as they're depicted, and more similar to... So let's discuss the Neanderthals' development into some of these taller beings with massive jaws and large cone-head skulls. Apparently the scientific community isn't interested in this because they're too busy recreating the falsehood known as a missing link, while ignoring the evidence right before their eyes. They state that these skulls are from normal human beings whose parents tied boards to their heads as babies to modify their skulls. But some of these skulls have twice the cranial capacity of modern human beings, which would mean genetics. In fact, some of these skulls have extra holes called foramens, which allow for more nerves and blood vessels to these massive heads. Another fact about these cone-head skulls is that they have been formed differently than human skulls. When a skull is forming in a child, the plates grow and fuse together with suture bones, which look like stitches that divide the skull up into plates. These cone-head Neanderthal skulls have not been formed the same as human skulls. They have different plates and suture bones, and they have extra openings for more arteries and nerves. And look at their Neanderthal facial structure. Once again, their pronounced snout and massive jawbone. The Paracas Museum features these strange skulls found all over the world, but mostly they are just that. Skulls and their skeletons have not been included. Still, I'm sure we could figure out the estimated height of some of these beings. Because when found with skeletal bones like this tall Neanderthal here, this one measured about 8 feet tall. Again, with a large cranium and identifiable facial structure, and different plates and suture bones in their skull. Thanks to Klaus Donna, we have some of his research to refer to. So it seems that the Neanderthal species, due to selective breeding and later science, have discovered ways to isolate certain genetic traits, such as size, cranial capacity, and as a race they developed into larger, smarter, and faster beings from their disease-prone, vitamin-starved, and 6-foot-tall ancestors. The Neanderthal was always interested in reproduction and genetics. Seen here are medical instruments, which were used in surgery and births. They are made out of Luddite and carry the very distinct look of Neanderthal craftsmanship. And if they themselves practice selective breeding or artificial insemination to isolate certain genes they saw as superior in themselves, such as height, strength, and brain size, we must realize that they also experimented on human beings when they came in contact with cultures starting in ancient times. And so some of these paracos skulls or elongated skulls, which look more human than Neanderthal, some of them have hair and so forth, yet still retain some irregularities. These were people with Neanderthal genetics mixed in, and they were often considered royals or priests. They found these beings buried in elite places with gold and valuables. So the tall Neanderthals approached human civilization in ancient times and played God. They set up the priest class and the royalty to set the example to others that the Neanderthals were to be worshipped and emulated, and whole civilizations were consumed by these cults. Due to these run-ins, still today people possess a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA, and this is why. If these royals and priests were worshipping the Neanderthal beings with all these sex rituals and human sacrifice, it would not be difficult for the Neanderthals to abduct people or impregnate women and tamper with human beings' genetics. And the child would come out looking more similar to his Neanderthal relatives, and he or she would be regarded highly by this possessed culture and possibly go on to be a priest or a royal. Many of these civilizations have come and gone, as is the nature of destruction, and the control shifts to a different part of the world. The Neanderthals are a genetic creation which was seeded on Earth before humanity came in from the fine matter state. So the Neanderthals developed first. They had these sophisticated medical tools made out of Luddite. They also understood where babies came from earlier in their development. They have this genetic disc that depicts sperm, egg, and zygote and so forth. They have depicted themselves, large-eyed Neanderthal beings down here. They're shown male and female. And up above them, they show two more interesting figures, but not exactly Neanderthal. These are depictions of their creators, almost perfect illustrations of Drax with its large frog-like eyes. At this time in their development, the Neanderthals assumed, or were led to believe, the beings from Alpha Draconis were also male and female, which they are not. They are an asexual hermaphrodite. The Dracs are very tall, 8 to 11 feet tall at least. They have very large craniums and enlarged eyes, and the Neanderthal attempts to isolate as much of its Drac genes as possible in form around us. These food chains that they are describing, or levels of sophistication in nature, isn't a process of evolution. We see every plant or animal maintaining their position and integrity in the cycles of nature. We don't see simple organisms evolving into complex ones. Rather, they always would exist on their level of genetic coding. A human being starts off as a tiny group of cells and grows into a human being. A person didn't start off as ocean plankton and then evolve into a human being. He or she was always so. Yet it's hard to grasp the concept of beginnings, especially planetary beginnings. Yet from out of the fine matter state, these whole ecosystems were created at once. Fine matter, which physicists are always searching for and calling the God particle as they study subatomic particles. When they discover fine matter, it will account for the mass which holds the universe together in star systems, galaxies, and planetary orbits. Essentially, fine matter is... I will now discuss the evolution theory, which basically summarizes how all life on Earth began, starting in the ocean with very simple organisms, which then changed into fish, which changed into amphibians, which crawled out onto lands and became reptiles, which evolved into birds, and somehow human beings fit into this food web, when something evolved into monkeys, which then evolved into human beings. And if you study this, they state that they base the whole theory on the fact that these creatures have nuclei, or at least one nucleus. Anyway, we don't really see life